Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the weekly radio show to help you uncover and unlock the entrepreneurial skills in your business. In this week's show, Introvert Myth of the Week. Introverts are weird. Tip of the Week, Perceptual Narrowing. And a discussion with Kathy Chillistone. Kathy is an HR professional, mental health first aider and organisational development specialist. Just before speaking to Kathy, I was thinking about physics while running along the riverbank several times this week. One of them was enjoying my Maybank holiday. I think the lovely thing about this time of the year is that plants grow really fast, even the stinging nettles. But walking along the path, I don't worry about them. Then running along in shorts, and yes, there have been some days that have been that warm, I start worrying, will my legs get attacked by the nettles and the weeds? What's going on? Do my legs get fatter when they go faster? I bet you've suffered similar issues though. Drive your car through a barrier designed to keep out trucks, and despite knowing your car fits you, slow right down, as if your car is fatter when it goes faster. What's really going on? Perceptual narrowing. When we have something big to think about, or start to get stressed, worried, or it's all piling up in our heads, we notice less the other things around us. Our perceptions narrow. Perceptual narrowing is a special concern underwater. If a diver gets stressed, they notice less things, which can make it problematic. But as somebody that leads people, you can suffer too. Getting busier, more stressed, can lead you to focus more on the familiar, potentially leading to communication patterns with introverts that you normally try and prevent. Then, your introverted team member isn't as effective. Then, your problems get worse. What's the answer? It's normally twofold. 1. Be aware of the issue. You now know what perceptual narrowing is. Number 2. As you notice perceptual narrowing, stop. Stand back. Use it as a sign to change what's going on. Or, at the very least, be aware that your communication and how you act with your team will change, which will probably be noticed by your introverts first. Do let me know what tip you'd like to help you activate the entrepreneurial skills in your business, or what introvert myth you'd like exposed. Drop me an email, give me a call, or add it as a comment to your review on the iTunes Store. I really would like to get some more reviews on the iTunes Store, and I would love to hear from you. But now, it's time to speak to Kathy.
Hi John, thanks for having me today.
Oh, it's really good to actually stop and have a good conversation. Before we started and when we met last, we were talking about mental health first aid, we were talking about anxiety, self-confidence, self-belief, this whole basket of stuff and how it interfaces, if you like, with introversion, extroversion. But before we dive into all of that, one simple question. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
The answer to that isn't straightforward because I see myself as an ambivert. I'm comfortable in both zones. So depending on the purpose, my audience and so on, the context of the situation, I can readily switch between being an introvert and having those qualities and being perfectly comfortable in that zone. And at other times, switching to the other if needed. Yeah, that wasn't something that was prevalent for me earlier on in my career or lifetime. I think I was far more extrovert, and you learn poise and you learn humility as you grow as a person, and certainly professionally as well. And so this sort of introverted side, I was able to bring out. I had the confidence to actually go to those qualities and those defaults and norms more readily, rather than feeling that I had to fit.
As you developed more self-confidence, you found the ability to flex and extend yourself from being perhaps just extroverted to learning to come across as an introvert at times and bring out other aspects of yourself.
Hmm.
Okay, it's quite interesting. Mental health crops up a lot more I see it a lot more in the business news and in the news generally, mental health
Hmm.
first aider, which until recently I'd never heard of one of those. What's behind all this?
I think this is a subject that we could talk about for hours, but I recognise we've only got a short space. I was brought up in the 70s. Attitudes and norms and expectations that were reinforced in home family values and the world of work, but also then the media, has shifted massively. We've also since then become a really diverse population with different belief systems, different expectations, and in terms of what is acceptable and not acceptable, that has changed how we experience the world, how we interact with the world. And that's picked up in terms of the acceleration of that has really picked up in recent years. And well-being and wellness there's a known link and correlation between wellness and well-being and productivity from a business perspective. We know that if our staff feel cared for, looked after, valued, respected, and so on, they're likely to deliver efficiently and achieve the targets and the bottom line far more in an optimal way. But business aside, I think socially there's been an appetite to bring to the fore conversations about mental health and the factors that affect our mental health, and really bringing it on a par in the same way that we discuss physical health. It's been a long stigmatized and taboo area of conversation, and perhaps that's reflected in how in decades previous we have managed, hidden maybe at times, and also supported mental health treatment. And so for individuals to feel that they can freely discuss mental health and how it changes is something that is becoming more prevalent, and it's important to everybody. I have a view, as do many others and organisations, that we all have mental health just as we have physical health. And in order to maintain that health, we need to create an environment that is open, where we can freely discuss mental health and what supports and protects it. And so how, the factors that also affect it and can damage it, so that we can get the right support and recovery.
So, how important is the role of an HR practitioner and of a leader in creating that safe environment?
Well, leaders and HR professionals, usually they are the ones that drive the commitment to examine and diagnose really where the culture is and where they want the culture to be. But it's a hugely complex area. Financial well-being affects our mental health and well-being. Physical well-being impacts our mental health and well-being. And if the culture of a business is quite punitive or maybe quite toxic in terms of macho expectations and what have you, maybe the language that is used, or it's a very high performing culture but with very little development and support, or maybe a blame, these things can all inhibit that person being open to say, actually, I'm not coping with these demands, I'm not coping with these stresses, this is unrealistic, I can't sustain this. Certain organisations, people can be brave and they can have those conversations. So it's our responsibility as leaders and HR practitioners to really open up the conversation and start addressing what the opportunities are, both socially from an employee engagement point of view, but also an employer engagement and branding point of view. Because if you are that model progressive employer, you're going to be able to attract people that support your ultimate goals in what you're trying to achieve culturally, let alone commercially.
Would it be fair to say that what I would call an extrovert culture and an extrovert bias in businesses, would you see that as something that can be quite damaging, particularly for the introverts in the business as well?
Yeah, hugely. There are certain professions I think that we can all relate to, or certain kinds of organisations that are so driven that the pressures and demands and expectations lend to recruiting like-minded people fit in with those cultural norms, even if that environment is quite toxic and aggressive. So, for example, financial sector organisations, I'm talking about city financial, where it's millions and billions of pounds, the risk that are involved with some of the decisions that are being made are massive. Reputational risk as well as commercial risk for investors and the whole chain that relates. So if someone's judgment, their concentration, their decision-making may be impaired as a result of poor mental health, oftentimes what happens in that sector is that person leaves, usually quietly, through settlement agreement, they move on. That doesn't mean that other sectors and other professions don't have demands and stresses and pressures. They do. It's just a completely different set of stresses and demands and pressures and norms and approaches to deal with that.
What I'd like to do is take from you one tip for an introvert in business, perhaps around the area of mental health, and one tip for a leader, perhaps who isn't even an introvert, who wants to help the mental health of their introverted employees.
Whenever someone isn't being true to type and their authentic self, whether they're introvert or extrovert, I think that can manifest in a lot of anxiety, which can erode that person's sense of well-being and perhaps adversely impact their mental health. For an introverted listener, I'd recommend not apologising, stop apologising.
Oh, I like that.
And also not tolerating interruptions. All too often, the voice and the insights and the preparedness that you have to be prepared as an introvert, because often you're put on the spot in certain business situations, and that can be incredibly uncomfortable. But when you are prepared and you respond, just don't tolerate those interruptions that come. Make sure that you take your time, you soften your voice to ensure that there's active listening around you so that your key points are listened to and taken on board.
Brilliant, thank you.
Or a non-introverted listener, shall we say, rather than going at 100 miles an hour, steamrollering, just breathe, just pause. Allowing pregnant pauses when it may not feel natural to you, because a pregnant pause may to you feel like it's an aid, but to somebody else, just 2 or 3 seconds for them to collect their thoughts and respond and become involved in a conversation is a golden opportunity for you to really build trust with your colleagues or in that business situation, because they feel valued, they feel that their voice is included. So if you slow down and don't jump in to fill those pregnant pauses, it's really going to bring lots of brilliant ideas and minds to the fore.
So very much that from a leader point of view is, I love that pregnant pause thing, because that works directly to the fact that introverts tend to process their thoughts internally, which can sometimes leave a little gap. But I think the other thing that you've done, you've neatly linked those tips back, because of course they're going to help people to develop their self-confidence, and they're going to help people to be much more authentic in themselves, which starts to reduce the mental health issues.
Absolutely.
Kathy, it's been wonderful to talk to you. How can listeners get back in touch with you?
My HR business is KCHR, and I have a website for that, but you can also find me on Instagram or on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, John.
And now it's time for Introvert Myth of the Week. Those crazy stories that I hear and you hear, but some people actually believe. Introverts are weird. Well, maybe they are, but no more than any other group of people you could choose. And yet, I hear this again and again. Introverts are weird. Well, let's be honest. Introverts can, by their nature, often be individualists. They don't follow the crowd. Many seem to prefer to be valued for their novel ways of thinking and living, rather than their expounded views, which is much more of an extrovert way of thinking. They'll think for themselves, and because of that, they often challenge the norm. They don't make decisions based on what's popular or trendy. But that doesn't make us weird. Thanks for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you enjoyed this week's show. Please add your review to the iTunes store. It will mean a lot. Enjoy being introversial, and I'll catch up with you next week.